They're basically factory farms on the water and come with a lot of the same problems that land-based farms do.
Welcome to the Our Henhouse interview. I'm Jasmine Singer.
I'm Marianne Sullivan.
And we're so pleased today that we're going to be welcoming back to the show Lee Cascada to talk about sea life and the brand new organization which she founded called the Aquaculture Accountability Project. I can't wait to talk to her because this is, as we'll talk about, a topic that's for some reason still not nearly explored enough. So thankfully Laura exists and is exploring it, to say the very least. Before we get to that, just a quick reminder about the Our Hen House podcasts. Rising Anxieties comes out on Tuesdays, the Hen Report on Thursdays, and the long form interview, that's this, on Fridays. And Bonus for Flock members comes out on Mondays. We're a podcast. We're also on YouTube, so subscribe and hit like wherever you listen. So without further ado, welcome back to the Our Hen House podcast, Laura Lee.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here again.
I am too. This is a topic that I am endlessly intrigued by and fascinated by the fact that, I've been working in animal rights for decades, and it's still something that there's just not enough attention put on it. So I imagine that most people listening are somewhat familiar with aquaculture, but I imagine, like me, a lot of them are not fully familiar with what's happening and the speed with which it is happening. So can you just start by giving us the sky high picture of what aquaculture is and its current size and status, and then we'll get into details.
Sure. Yeah. So back in around the late, I would say 1960s, 1970s, when overfishing started to become really a huge problem on the global scale, the aquaculture industry, which is basically the idea of raising animals in a confined area for food, started to grow. And the whole supposed goal was that they would replace overfishing by growing animals like salmon and tilapia in these cages or in these pens and be able to produce them on a mass scale to sort of displace overfishing. And as I'll get into it, that hasn't really worked out. But the idea is that they're basically factory farms on the water and come with a lot of the same problems that land-based farms do.
So it's totally been promoted, and I think in most people's minds, this is what it is, that it's this way to save the oceans and get the populations of ocean dwelling animals back up to where they should be. People think of it as kind of benign. So can you tell us why that is totally not the truth?
Yeah, well, that is by design. The industry has really used a lot of greenwashing or blue washing, whatever you want to call it, to convey that and to really help itself grow and convince consumers and places that serve food like universities that they're doing a good thing by buying farmed fish. But there are so many reasons which my project kind of sheds light on as to why this is false and greenwashing. And we talk about 5 different main myths that I can go into more, but essentially the aquaculture industry is telling us that it's displacing overfishing. That's the biggest one. And in reality, it's driving more fishing because to feed a lot of these fish who are popular as food in the US and other global north countries, you have to use wild caught fish. And so it's adding more and more pressure. And there's been no evidence that eating farmed fish has actually displaced eating wild fish. So the two are basically growing together in parallel.
So is that because of the use of the wild caught fish as food, or just because it's made fish more popular, and so people are I mean, say salmon, I don't know, whatever fish. I know salmon are commonly farmed. So is the use of farmed salmon actually growing the popularity of salmon in a way that's causing more fishing of wild salmon as well?
Yeah, so there's 2 kind of things at play here. One is what I just spoke about, that salmon need wild caught fish to feed them. And so that intensifies pressure, especially in areas like West Africa and South America, where they're catching these small fish to feed the salmon. But then, as you have picked up on, the second issue is that farmed fishing has made sort of the idea of eating fish more and more popular because of all of the marketing, because of all the bad science that they're putting out, and essentially has convinced people to eat way more fish. I mean, we were eating near zero, and I mean, in the US, people were eating near zero salmon just 40 years ago, and now it's over 3 pounds per person per year. So when people go to the store, they don't know really, or maybe don't care what kind they're buying. But as a result of the aquaculture industry growing so much, it has just grown overall fish consumption, wild and farmed.
So in addition to salmon, are most of the fish that are farmed carnivorous, or do some of them eat? I have no idea what fish eat. I guess algae or something. Um, like, is it mostly that we're farming fish that have to eat other fish, and that's why this is such a particular disaster?
Well, the most popular ones in countries like the US and other global north countries are carnivorous or omnivorous. And we also look at shrimp with this project too. So they're also omnivores and require wild caught animals to feed them. But some are, and salmon are increasingly being fed more plant-based foods. But the problem there is that studies have shown that no matter what their diet is, they're not creating a net amount of protein. So, even if it's soy that's coming from rainforests where trees have been cut down to produce it, or grains, we're taking a massive amount of resources and funneling them through fish, which are actually way less efficient than if you were eating, plant-based options, and sometimes even less efficient than other animal-based proteins.
Yeah, so that's very similar though to the problems of factory farming of land animals that they have to eat, even though they're not eating other animals, as so many of the fish are. Even when they're eating plants, they're vastly reducing the amount of nutrition that people can get from those plants. So that
Yeah.
I had not realized that. I know very little about what fish eat, but either way, it's a problem.
And I want to take a step back, and I do want to get into those myths as well, but I feel like I'm still catching up too, like Marianne is. What is the status of overfishing? Actually, I think all fishing is overfishing, but I digress. Like, where are ocean populations? How have fish farms made it worse?
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's astronomically worse than it was when fish farming first came about. And so right now, only 7% of so-called fisheries are not considered overexploited or fully exploited, which just means basically being fully exploited means that it's at the max limit without causing the population to crash. So to me, that is not a good metric for keeping a fish population healthy, of course. But the fact that only 7% are not in that category or worse, and that has been a continuously shrinking number over the last 50 or 60 years while farmed fishing has grown, really reveals a lot about how it hasn't fixed the problem.
So I just before we go on, I just wanted to go back a second and reaffirm what you said about people didn't used to eat a lot of salmon. I mean, I remember people didn't used to eat a lot of fish. I mean, and I was Catholic, so we ate fish on Friday, and it was just total punishment. Like fish, the different perception uh, of fish is a very common food. Really, really is true. Salmon, occasionally we would get lox. I'm sorry to be speaking about eating animals, but I grew up eating animals. And
Yeah,
it was
most of us
so
did.
expensive. It was so expensive. You would just put a tiny little piece of lox on your bagel. This is so dramatically changed in the availability of the popularity of fish. I mean, and people, as we said at the beginning, they have a really off perception of what aquaculture is. They think it's really virtuous. They think it's really good. Can you talk a little bit about, there's obviously reasons for that, not just that people are making it up, but there's a pretty big gap between what the industry says about what they're doing and what it is doing, right? Can you just talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. So aquaculture was sort of framed as this blue revolution. Again, the idea of saving the oceans while still allowing us to eat a lot of fish. And they've used so much marketing to drive that home. And they've also used some really insidious sort of manipulative behaviors, both with consumers and policymakers. So, for example, there was a project in the 80s called Project Japan, and that was where the Norwegian seafood industry came into Japan, where in sushi culture, they weren't actually using salmon because they thought that this fish was too risky, might have parasites. And they used a marketing campaign to convince Japanese chefs that salmon was safe and trendy and modern. And they used all kinds of advertising and events. And they did so right as sushi was becoming this big worldwide phenomenon. So this was really calculated, and they basically got salmon included into sushi culture. And then as it spread around the world, so many people were exposed to salmon who hadn't been eating salmon. So it was like things like that, where they were going in and really knowing what they were doing and convincing people of the safety and environmental sustainability of these products that doesn't exist.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, there's so many misperceptions out there. I also grew up eating animals, but not fish, only because long before I made any kind of connection between, the land animals that I was consuming and the ethics, I just thought the idea of eating fish was weird and disgusting, and it was like funny how that sort of entered my reality early on. So I've never really eaten it. Let's talk about the welfare of fish and other sea life. I'm getting the feeling that it's pretty bad. How bad is it?
Yeah, I mean, they are kept in essentially factory farming conditions. So salmon, for example, are kept in these pens in the water. They're called open net pens, sometimes on land as well. But essentially, millions or hundreds of thousands are put into these pens. They have very little room. They often, if you check out the footage, which is really disturbing, but they often are swimming around with deformities and injuries, and commonly sea lice, which infects them. And because the water quality is so poor, because they're swimming around there with their own waste, they often develop diseases that can cause, I don't want to get too graphic, but just a lot of organ problems and pain and suffering. And the mortality is so high on these farms, it can be upwards of 15 or 20%. So again, the huge loss of life and also just the wastefulness of this industry. It's really terrible. And one other thing that often isn't noticed that I saw coming out in the news the other week is that they use cleaner fish these are smaller fish who are used to clean the sea lice off the salmon, and the mortality on these guys is also really huge. There's hundreds of thousands of them dying every year with basically no one knowing about them.
Yes.
Wow. It's just everything you hear is bad, and then you always hear more and it's worse. Every single topic in this area. I mean, we obviously focus on the welfare of the animals, but just as obviously, a lot of other people focus on the other issues involved in in raising any kind of food, and so which would include obviously environmental. But before we get to environmental, which I know those implications are huge, and I assume a big part of your marketing, what about the human health implications? Is it like? Can these diseases spread? Are there human health implications involved other than just the fact that eating animals isn't good for you?
Yeah, there are a number. And I think it's a really great point about welfare versus sustainability versus human health. And I think, especially in this industry, it's all so tied together, because all of the conditions that make welfare so poor are also things that cause havoc on the environment and human health. When it comes to human health, the main problem is the antibiotics that are needed to deal with the rampant disease on these farms. And we're seeing a huge antimicrobial resistance problem across the world that is definitely furthered by this industry. So we're seeing that you can go and test shrimp or other fish on grocery store shelves and still see remnants of antibiotics. And often these are illegal antibiotics in the US. So the overuse of antibiotics is really concerning for humans, along with the diseases. They can be passed to other fish in the water. They can be on fish still when you buy the products at the store. And just the contaminants and the filth that they're raised in, it's just all basically a big mess.
What about the environmental implications? I think that, unfortunately, because it's hard enough to get people to care about land animals, and they tend to care about those who are most like them, it probably is harder to get them to care about fish. People pretend that they care about the environment. So are there, like, what are the arguments there that you can tell someone?
Yeah, so the diseases that they have do spew out into the surrounding environment. So other ocean animals are at risk. And there have actually been studies showing that a lot of the bacteria surrounding these sites are antibiotic resistant, meaning that if animals or people pick them up, then they're less likely to be treatable. So it really does cascade throughout the environment and to people. And this is all because these are open net pens in the ocean. They're basically treating these pens like their own private property when really they're like in our public area for everybody to enjoy.
So in land-based agriculture currently, I mean, obviously there's a big move to get people to go vegan or at least to eat less meat, but there's a lot of effort going into making factory farming not as bad, like cage-free campaigns, crate-free campaigns. Are there ways to improve the conditions within fish farming? Are companies trying to do that, or at least saying they're doing that? Or is it just awful and there's no way to fix that and we're just gonna ignore that? Like, is that part of the campaign to improve the conditions in fish farming?
That's not something we're working on. I know that a lot of people are, and I think it's a really great endeavor to try to improve the welfare of animals who are already kind of doomed in this system. But we kind of see it as all of these farms are factory farms. So even if you improve the conditions a little bit, the amount of harm done is still so great that people need to know, what it is they're buying. And there's a huge problem with greenwashing labels now where they, slap them on the package and say that this was responsibly farmed. I saw that in the store the other day. So people don't know what that means. And if they make one little tweak or, do a couple of things and then have one of these labels, people think, oh, this is like a perfect product. And it's the same with land animal products. And so we really want to raise the alarm on these and hope that people, don't get tricked by these.
Yeah, like what kind of improvements would there be? Like, would it be more space, like fewer, not as densely packed? Like, I don't even understand how you would improve the conditions.
There are some changes like that, trying to reduce the stocking density, although it's difficult because that means, the companies will profit less, but that would
Well,
give
yeah,
fish more
that's always the
room.
problem.
Right. And then, providing less cruel stunning and slaughter for them,
Okay. Yeah, slaughter. Yeah.
providing more enrichment things for them to do, although it's really hard to do things when you're really stressed out and suffering.
Yeah.
So there are some changes, and I think a lot of the certifications really focus more on environmental changes as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
which we've also found are really insufficient. Like some of these certifications, claim that they're responsible and sustainable, but when it comes down to it, they're still allowing antibiotics. They're still allowing extremely high volumes of fish packed into small areas. They're not doing anything about water quality. They have no limits for mortality. So there's really small changes being made, but I think for the average person who doesn't want to be contributing to this, they would be surprised at how small those changes really are.
I know that microplastics are having a real moment, like finally kind of getting into the mainstream. Uh,
So to speak.
Well, yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
Are people like drawing the connection between what's in our seas as far as microplastics and fishes and like are there any connections there that you're able to speak to? I'm going rogue here. I wasn't planning on asking about this, but I did just see like on some mainstream news there was like this massive story about it and I feel like I'm seeing it everywhere. Is there a connection here?
Yeah, so there's definitely some concern about the nets used in these farms contributing to microplastics. And then I've also read about how shrimp as a seafood, I hate calling it that, but
Yeah.
shrimp are the highest in microplastics of any other type of sea animal eaten. And most of shrimp are farmed. So about 90% of the shrimp that people eat are farmed. So it's definitely a concern. I think microplastics are everywhere. And of course, raising these animals in the sea and in bodies of water, using plastic materials, or even the plastics already in those bodies of water getting into those animals' bodies. It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just seems like microplastics is something that people hear, like it creeps them out. I don't know. That's my that's my estimate. I'm always astounded when people seem to care about anything. Um, our audience is by and large, this is for information mostly because they're already not eating sea animals. I'm trying to call them sea animals and not seafood. I'm working on that really hard. Um, so what would be your advice to people who would like to have some basic information that they can convey to people who, sometimes people are actually curious about the situation that's going on with the food they're eating. What would be your best, like maybe 3 talking points to make an impact on people from your experience talking about these issues? What points do you suggest other people use when they only have a few minutes, they only have an elevator speech to convey what's wrong with fish farming?
I think the aquaculture industry has sold fish farming as a lifeline for our oceans, and it's delivered factory farms that devour wild fish, bring diseases to people and to other animals, and pollute our coasts. And aquaculture also promised to fix overfishing, but in reality, fish populations have plummeted for decades. And now we're seeing more than 90% of so called fisheries being fully or
Wow.
overexploited, meaning they're at the brink. Aquaculture hasn't done anything to fix this problem and has only made it worse. And the best thing that people can do to help with this problem is really to cut back on eating sea animals or eat no sea animals at all, and to be aware of greenwashing labels. They can share this with their friends and family. And next time they're at the grocery store and they see labels like responsibly farmed or sustainable, they'll know that really isn't what it seems.
I want to go back to what you said at the beginning of our interview, which was the 5 myths. Can we go back to that? What are they the 5 myths of? And can you get into it?
And I think we only got to 2, did we? Because I interrupted you.
Yeah, no problem. It's a lot. And our whole project is dedicated to exposing these and to, helping people understand them. But basically, the first one is about um, aquaculture saying that it's the solution to overfishing. So these are all myths that the industry is promoting. The second myth, which we kind of got into, is about aquaculture providing this seafood for this rising demand across the world. And we talked a little bit about this, but basically, aquaculture is sort of creating that demand through its misleading marketing, through pushing policymakers to allow it to grow infinitely. And in reality, people wouldn't be needing so much seafood. And it's really driving this demand in the global north, like in the US, where we're already eating so much. We have no need to eat anymore. The rest of the myths, we kind of did go through a lot of it. One is about it being a safe and healthy protein, which we talked about being not true. And then the fourth one is around climate. A lot of people change their diet because of climate change. And sometimes that ends up being, removing beef and replacing beef with seafood. So when you look at the numbers, though, farmed fish is actually worse than chicken and about the same as pork in terms of emissions. And farmed shrimp is way worse. It's the worst out of all sea animal foods. And lastly is regarding the labels, which I talked about a little bit, the certifications seeming to be this guarantee of sustainability and health when in reality they're often tied to industry. The industry pays them to be certified. So that kind of creates a conflict of interest. And there's really very little accountability for the certifications. Often they're not visiting every farm, so they don't even know, what's going on behind the scenes.
So I noticed that you're working with Farm Forward. Is that a formal collaboration? How linked to them are you? I guess they don't really cover sea animals.
Yeah, so we're working with them a lot in terms of, leveraging their expertise. They have extensive experience in humane washing, and looking at how different labels for the land animal farming industry have really tricked consumers into thinking that, they're buying eggs from happy hens and beef from, free roaming cows. And so they've had so much experience with this. They've, exposed, for example, antibiotics in antibiotic free meat at Whole Foods. It was supposed to be antibiotic free, and just showing people that, what they think they're paying for is not the reality. So in teaming up with Farm Forward, that really leverages their expertise, and we're working really closely with them, to help get this new sort of industry. Well, it's not a new industry, but, new to people, I think, thinking about it in this way, to get more exposure on this.
It's so there are such differences in the land animal area because Farm Forward states that it's anti-factory farming. And to be anti-factory farming in the land animal area basically means that you have to drastically reduce your consumption
Yeah.
or stop your consumption, because to treat animals well costs a lot of money, and it just doesn't work. So it's kind of inherent in being anti-factory farming to also be saying that you should reduce. But it seems like it's a little different with fish, because there's this alternative source of wild caught that people who really don't know a lot or don't care about the environment could just go back to. Do you find that like a contrast in how you in how you talk about the solution, that the solution has to include cutting down or hopefully cutting out? Was that question clear? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that gets tricky because I think that is kind of like a gut reaction that a lot of people have is, if farmed fish is so bad, why shouldn't I just go back to eating
Yeah.
wild fish? And
Where we
there
truly
are,
are talking about just one bad day with wild caught fish.
in the bigger picture, though, I think when we look at just the massive scale, so farmed fish is making up a little more than half of what people eat now, and then wild caught has kind of gone to second place. But scale wise, first of all, we can't sustain this scale, these kinds of numbers, because neither one of those two industries can keep functioning at the level they are. So we have to reduce overall. In the US, most fish is farmed. So it's obvious that we have to reduce, and that includes farmed fish. But the reason we can't just go back to wild fish is because they're already at the brink. These fisheries are at the brink, and they keep getting worse every year. So we have to reduce pressure on them as well. And of course, with wild fish, a lot of the problems of, toxic chemicals like mercury, exposure to bacteria and antibiotics from, passing through these farms or from wastewater. A lot of these problems still persist in wild fish. And then, of course, the welfare problems, and the extremely inhumane conditions that they're subjected to in these nets, and then being thrown overboard, and then, slaughtered. And it's all just horrific. So we're really advocating for an overall reduction or, elimination if you can.
Yeah, no, I know you are, and those are really good arguments. But it is a little trickier than the land animal thing, where you kind of just don't have to eat. Like if people are eating a high welfare in animals, it's really expensive. If it's not really expensive, it's definitely not quote unquote high welfare. Anyway,
We obviously also are, giant proponents of not living a life that is centered around exploitation of animals in any capacity. What are your thoughts, either personally or as an advocate, about the word vegan?
Yeah, I mean, I personally use the word vegan, and I have no problems with it. I think that it's a great way to, identify living a life without consuming animal products. It depends on the audiences we're talking with because, some of the decision makers that we're going to and presenting these ideas to might unfortunately not resonate with the word vegan. So we talk a lot about reduction and eating more plant-based foods, and the decision makers we're talking with often are serving foods in large cafeterias, and so we want them to see plant-based foods are great. A lot of people are eating vegan. It's more inclusive for your menu. There's you know allergens you can avoid. It's more climate friendly. So we might not always use the word vegan when we're talking with certain people, but yeah, I use it for myself for sure.
I want to get into more of your work in both, individual messaging, but it looks like you're focusing a lot on institutional providers. But there was another issue I wanted to get into first, and I just think this is a really interesting issue. And I'm wondering, since you are dealing with both salmon and shrimp, are your main focus, I think, for the moment, because there's a lot of animals, sea animals out there. Um, like, do you differentiate, like when you're talking about welfare, do you differentiate between fish and shrimp, or I guess it could even come to clams or oysters, animals whose sentience is really not clear to people? It's really not necessarily clear to even scientists. When you keep reaching to a further level, do you talk about levels of sentience or sophistication of sentience, or is it just like with, since you're only dealing with shrimp, but imagine you're dealing with others as well, is it just like they're sentient or they're not, and you feel you can convince people of that, or do you just avoid the issue completely? I'm always so curious now that we've discovered that everybody out there is sentient. I think our our messaging on the issue has become so much more complex. I'm just wondering how you handle it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't talk a lot about it with decision makers who are,
Yeah,
concerned
I can
about their
imagine.
menus and all of
Yeah.
that. But for me personally in my work, I've always had a huge affinity for crustaceans and been keenly aware of their ability to suffer. Several years back, I guess it's been about 10 years or so now, but I founded a project to help hermit crabs who were being or still are being caught from the Caribbean and sold on the beach here in the US at shops during the summer. And it's a really cruel industry because they're taking these animals who can live for 30 years out in the wild and putting them into tiny cages where tourists will take them home. And then they basically die of suffocation over the course of a few months because the air isn't humid enough and they require very specific conditions. So for me, crustacean welfare has always been a huge concern of mine. I have a particular love for crustaceans. And I think, science has shown us like they can rub wounds when they're hurt. They can form bonds, they can work together. So I think, the sentience is pretty clear, and we need to be able to recognize that for all sea animals.
I mean, I'm sure there's still people who think that fish, like the salmon, aren't sentient at all. Like, do you run into that a lot, or do you just avoid it, or like it's just
Yeah,
bizarre to me that people still
yeah.
think that fish, like I don't know, they think they're like vegetables or so. They're just wandering around like completely unconscious or something. Do you push it, or do you just focus on when you run into obstacles on those, or just focus on the environmental? You have so many different issues you could turn to. Uh,
Yeah, I think we're realizing that too more as we get into this, and we're now purposely emphasizing the term sea animals. I know you said something about that earlier because we want to make sure that they are being seen as animals and we're not reinforcing the idea that they're just seafood. So, it's taking some language adjusting because when you're hearing people say
Yeah.
seafood over and over again and not thinking
Yeah.
of them as animals, we
Yeah.
do want to subtly like not reinforce that and really drive home that they are animals just in, small ways so that it can open their minds up to, slowly changing and seeing things differently. So for sure. And the other thing is when we talk about the diseases that these fish suffer from, we definitely emphasize the suffering that they go through with those diseases or with those injuries that they receive. So we don't kind of hide those details. We want people to realize that there is suffering there.
Yeah.
So
Makes
before
sense.
we close, and I am interested in chatting with you further for our flock bonus content, but before we do that, I'd love to know a little bit more specifically about your outreach efforts. Like, who are you talking to? I'm assuming it's not generally our henhouse listeners that's your main audience, but we're the allies. And what is your ask, especially on an institutional level?
Yeah, so our main audiences right now are environmental leaders because, I think fish has been pushed as this eco-friendly solution for so long that a lot of environmental organizations and professionals have embraced aquaculture as a sort of solution. And so we're talking with them. We really want to see the environmental movement move away from all animal products and toward plant-based eating. And we're also working on universities and really anywhere that serves food. I think events are a really good place for starting out because conferences can easily, make a decision for their conference that then sort of sets a precedent for years to come. So our basic kind of asks for them are to reduce sea animals that they're serving and prioritize more plant-based options. Definitely keep shrimp and salmon, farm shrimp and salmon off the menu, and then to not be pulled into these greenwashing labels. So we've seen a lot of places that have committed to using labels or guides like Seafood Watch, none of which really ensure good sustainability or welfare or human health for that matter. So we want them to just be aware of those and to not fall for using them as a commitment to signal sustainability when that's not really the case.
And just to clarify, you are not in the business of recommending quote unquote high welfare sources of fish.
Nope. We're fully promoting drastically reducing the amount of fish that is being served across the U.S.
Okay.
So tell our listeners how they can find out more about the Aquaculture Accountability Project and get involved with your efforts.
Yeah, so you can find us. It's a long URL, but you can find us at aquacultureaccountability.org. You can shoot me an email from there. There's an easy contact form there. We have social media too. Aquaculture Accountability is our handle for the most part because it's a little shorter than the whole name. And yeah, we would love, especially students. I think that's a really great opportunity. For example, we've talked with some students who have already run their own campaign at Scripps College in California and gotten their dining hall to agree to remove shrimp from the menu. I think students have a really, great position to advocate for these kinds of changes. But even if you're not a student, even if you're just, someone in your community who wants to make a difference, we'd love to talk with you.
I love that. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. I
Thank
want to
you.
dig a little bit more into some of the reasons that you were called to do this work, but we'll save that for bonus content. And also just for our listeners, we will link to the website and the socials as well on our show notes. So Lee Cascada, thank you for joining us today in our henhouse. And for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, comment on your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube. And don't forget that our next episode of Rising Anxieties comes out on Tuesday. So until next time, talk to you soon.